Here are things a child should never see. Like a dog dangling 30 stories above the ground, eyes wide, with silent pleading paws slipping inch by inch into empty air. But 6-year-old Emily didn't look away. While adults dismissed her words as childish fantasy, she heard what no one else could, the voice of a soul begging not to be forgotten. And when no one else moved, she did. Chapter 1. The Girl on Willow Street. It was the kind of spring morning that made the small town of Pinebrook feel like a watercolor painting. Pale sunlight poured through wisps of drifting fog, and dew clung to the porch railings like tiny crystals. The scent of freshly turned soil lingered in the air, and birdsong drifted lazily between the maple trees that lined Willow Street. But inside apartment 3B of the Birchwood Apartments, the air was heavy with fatigue and worry. Emily Monroe, age 6, sat on her knees at the breakfast table. She had wild golden curls that refused to be tamed, soft freckles dotted across her cheeks, and eyes the color of washed denim eyes that always seemed to be staring just a little past what everyone else saw. Her small frame carried the quiet intensity of someone who noticed everything, even when adults didn't. She was barefoot in a faded blue pajama set covered in tiny moons. Across from her sat her mother, Sarah Monroe, 34, tall and slender, with tired green eyes and sharp cheekbones. Her auburn hair was tied into a loose bun, and her nurse's scrubs still bore the scent of antiseptic. Sarah had once been full of laughter and boundless energy, but a bitter divorce 3 years earlier and long nights working emergency shifts at the local hospital had left her quieter, wary. She loved her daughter fiercely, though the exhaustion often dulled her edges. Beside the window, Charles Monroe, Emily's grandfather, hunched over the morning newspaper, with his glasses sliding down his nose. In his late 60s, Charles was a retired mail carrier with a wiry build and sun-weathered skin. His neatly trimmed white beard gave him a kind, if slightly stern appearance. He was a man of routine and reason, fond of crossword puzzles and toast with marmalade. After a minor heart attack last winter, he moved in with Sarah and Emily. Emily scooped a spoonful of cereal into her mouth, then froze. Her eyes widened, and she turned slowly toward the window, pupils dilating as if tuning in to something distant. "Mommy," she said quietly, "there's a dog hanging. He's calling me." Sarah blinked halfway through pouring her third cup of coffee. "A dog?" Emily nodded, pointing toward the tall red and silver television tower that loomed over the western edge of town. "On that tower. He's scared. I can feel it." Sarah followed her daughter's gaze but saw only a flicker of movement from a distant antenna. "Honey, that tower's nearly 20 stories tall. You can't possibly." "She's doing it again," Charles murmured, setting down his mug. "Like with the birds on the balcony last month." Emily stood, hands clenched. "He's up there, Grandpa, and he's hurting." Sarah sighed, but not unkindly. "Let's just look, okay?" They retrieved the binoculars from the hall closet, old military-grade ones Charles had kept from his service days. He adjusted the focus and gasped. "Oh, my God. Sarah." "She's right." He passed them to Sarah. Through the glass she saw it a large German shepherd, tan and black, was precariously perched on a maintenance platform barely wide enough to hold him. One paw dangled claws, scraping the edge. The platform, old and rust-stained, looked as though it hadn't been used in years. "Oh no," Sarah whispered. "How did he even get up there?" Emily was already pulling on her jacket. His name is Ranger. He was trying to find someone. Now he's stuck. Sarah's pulse quickened. Emily. How do you know his name? I just do, she said, matter of fact. He told me. Before Sarah could argue, Charles had picked up the phone and dialed 911. 10 minutes later, 2 police cars and a fire truck arrived. The crew began setting up a perimeter around the broadcast tower. Officer Dan Miller, a sturdy man in his late 40s with a square jaw and salt and pepper hair, approached the family. You're the ones who saw the dog. Yes, Sarah said, motioning toward the tower. My daughter spotted him. Dan's eyebrows lifted as he looked down at Emily. Good eyes, young lady. Emily shook her head. I didn't see him. I heard him. Before Dan could respond, a battered blue pickup pulled up next to the crowd. An elderly man with faded jeans, a thick gray beard, and a faded army cap stepped out, supported by a cane. His eyes locked onto the tower, and his mouth trembled. That's my dog, he whispered. Sarah stepped forward. Sir, are you okay? My name's Leonard Brooks. Ranger's mine. I'm sorry I didn't know he got out. He's all I've got since my wife passed. He was trained to help me with my memory lapses. Sarah placed a hand on his arm. We'll do everything we can. Fire Chief Teresa Calderon, a broad-shouldered woman with commanding presence, surveyed the tower with binoculars. That platform's ancient and corroded. We can't send anyone up. Too dangerous. Leonard's voice broke. You're just gonna let him fall. Emily stepped forward. There's a way. He showed me. A door. On the 19th floor. The adults paused. What door? Chief Calderon asked. A maintenance room. Hidden behind a red panel. Ranger saw it when he was searching. Dan radioed the building's manager to verify the detail. Moments later, confirmation came back. Such a door existed, but no one had used it in over a decade. The chief looked at Emily with a strange mix of suspicion and awe. How could she possibly know that Charles answered quietly, because sometimes she just does. The chapter closes with the fire crew preparing to access the forgotten maintenance room, while Ranger, eyes wide, continues to cling to the edge above. Emily stands quietly beside Leonard, who suddenly kneels down beside her. I think he found you for a reason, he whispers. Maybe you're the one who can bring him home. The camera pulls back, fog lifting slowly as sirens echo through sleepy Pine Brook, and a girl with a strange gift holds the heart of a story that hasn't finished unfolding. Chapter 2. The Silent Voice. The air around the tower had thickened, not just from the gathering crowd or the buzz of emergency radios, but from the weight of waiting. Ranger clung to the deteriorating metal platform, his tan coat streaked with grime, his breath fast and shallow. Every now and then he shifted slightly, adjusting his weight, keeping one paw pressed against a thin strip of steel. From the ground, he was barely more than a blur, but to Emily Monroe, he was crystal clear. She stood next to Leonard Brooks, her small hand nestled in his weathered palm. Leonard, once a decorated army mechanic, had a certain rugged dignity about him. Broad shoulders, now slightly stooped eyes that once scanned war zones, now darting nervously skyward. His memory had started slipping a year after his wife died, and Ranger had been his tether to the present. But today, even his dog's name had slipped from his mind until Emily had spoken it. Sarah Monroe watched her daughter carefully. Emily hadn't spoken a word since whispering that last phrase to Leonard. He showed me. Sarah, tall and lean in her pale blue nurse's jacket, looked older than her 34 years. Her expression was equal parts maternal concern and guarded awe. She had grown used to her daughter's strangeness, but never comfortable with it. Fire Chief Teresa Calderon issued orders briskly, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "We have confirmation on the 19th floor panel. Maintenance door is real, structurally intact. Ladder inside goes up to the 20th floor's outer catwalk." She turned to her team of 3, no full-size adults. "We'll need a smaller responder." Dan Miller, the police officer from earlier, scratched his stubbled jaw. "Chief, even the smallest among us won't fit through that upper access window. It only opens 8 inches. It was never meant for people." Calderon's eyes fell back on Emily, who stood stock still, eyes closed. "I'll go," she said, her voice soft but unwavering. Sarah stiffened. "Absolutely not." Leonard knelt beside her. "I know she's just a little girl, but maybe she's the only one he trusts right now." "No," Sarah said, turning to Calderon. "This is a rescue operation, not a fairy tale." But before anyone could respond, a new voice joined the conversation. "Excuse me." A woman in a mustard-yellow windbreaker stepped forward holding a large black case. She had shoulder-length, dark brown hair glasses and an air of quiet authority. "I'm Dr. Lillian Hawk. I'm a behavioral veterinarian from the Pine Brook Rescue Center. Ranger was trained there. If you'll let me, I think I can talk him down. If not, maybe Emily can help me do it." Lillian had a calm, grounded presence. She was in her early 40s, average height with steady hazel eyes and calloused hands. Known throughout the region for her success in trauma cases, she had once pulled a feral mountain dog from the edge of death after a forest fire. Chief Calderon nodded. "Fine. Let's move. You'll go up to the maintenance level. No direct access to the dog. Radio updates every 2 minutes." While the team moved into position, Emily stood by the sidewalk staring up at the dog. Her lips were moving, though no sound came out. Leonard noticed. "Are you praying?" he asked. "No," Emily whispered. "I'm listening." Inside the tower, the climb was slow. Dr. Hawk and one firefighter, a lean, quiet woman named Marissa Green, 27, with a boyish haircut and a scar along her jaw, reached the 19th floor. Marissa forced open the maintenance panel, revealing a tight crawl space and a rusted utility ladder. Emily's instructions had been oddly accurate down to the faded red tag hanging from a pipe. Outside, the crowd pressed closer, held back by yellow tape and weary officers. Someone handed Leonard a folding chair, but he stood, hands trembling on his cane. Dr. Hawk reached the narrow outer ledge. Through the tiny window, she could just barely see Ranger. The German Shepherd was whimpering now. His claws scraped raw his hind legs, shaking from effort. She tried a low, soothing whistle, but he didn't respond. Then she heard a small voice behind her. "May I try?" Emily had slipped past the cordon unnoticed, following the maintenance path through the building. She now stood beside Dr. Hawk, eyes luminous in the dim corridor. Dr. Hawk looked uncertain. "Does your mom know you're here?" "No. But Ranger does." Emily pressed her hands gently to the glass. Her lips moved again. This time Dr. Hawk heard a whisper. It wasn't in words. It was like wind slipping through dry leaves, a kind of vibration more than a sound. And then impossibly, Ranger responded. He stopped trembling. His ears perked. His gaze fixed not on the people below, but directly into Emily's face through the dusty pane. Dr. Hawk blinked. That's not training. No, Emily said quietly. It's remembering. From behind a commotion, Sarah had arrived red-faced and breathless, followed by Leonard and Officer Dan. Emily. But the girl didn't flinch. We need to bring him inside, Emily said. Now. Dr. Hawk relayed the order, and Marissa moved into place. Using an extendable catch pole, she gently looped it around Ranger's harness. On Emily's whispered encouragement, the dog inched backwards along the ledge just enough to reach the window. His body barely fit, but with 2 pairs of hands and one final lurch, Ranger fell inside, landing heavily on the concrete floor. He whimpered, but it was a sound of release, not fear. Emily knelt beside him, pressing her forehead to his. He says thank you, she whispered. Behind her, Leonard collapsed into a chair and cried for the first time in 20 years. Chapter 3. The Climb of Trust. The day after Ranger's rescue, the town of Pinebrook seemed to exhale in unison. A light rain had come overnight, washing away the dust and tension that had clung to the tower and the people around it. Streets shimmered with puddles, and the morning sun filtered through clouds like soft spotlights falling on damp rooftops and whispering trees. Yet inside apartment 3B, the air remained tight with silence. Emily Monroe sat on the couch, her knees pulled to her chest, a blue fleece blanket wrapped around her. She stared at nothing in particular, her fingers tracing invisible circles on the fabric. The world had shifted slightly, and while everyone praised her bravery, she felt more exposed than ever. Not for what she had done, but for what she had heard. Across the room, Sarah watched her daughter from the kitchen, her face unreadable. The lines near her mouth were drawn tight, and she moved stiffly, pouring cereal into a bowl without looking. The truth was, she was scared. Not of what Emily could do, but of what it meant. She had fought so long to hold their small world together with tape and coffee and late-night shifts. But this was something beyond any emergency room protocol. Ranger lay curled beside Emily, his head resting on her foot. The dog's body was lean, his coat dull from stress, but his eyes were bright now, aware, connected. He was roughly 7 years old, his tan and black fur threaded with early gray. Sarah had insisted he stay the night until someone from the shelter came. Emily had said nothing, just nodded once when asked. Ranger hadn't left her side. At exactly 8:32 a.m., the doorbell rang. It was Dr. Lillian Hawk, dressed in a green waterproof jacket over scrubs, her ever-present black bag slung across her shoulder. Her dark brown hair was tied in a tight ponytail, and today her face looked more curious than clinical. "I hope it's not too early," she said gently. "I came to check on Ranger, and maybe Emily too." Sarah nodded stiffly and stepped aside. "Coffee's still warm." Lillian crouched beside the dog. "Hey, big guy, how are we feeling this morning?" She ran her hands over his body with practiced care. No obvious trauma. Paws scraped, but healing clean. "He's lucky." Emily finally spoke. "He wants to go back," Lillian looked up. "Back where?" "To the tower," Emily said. "He thinks something's still missing." Sarah raised a brow. "Absolutely not. That place was dangerous enough the first time." Emily shook her head. "Not to climb again, just to remember." Later that afternoon, with Sarah reluctantly agreeing to supervise, they returned to the tower. The area was cordoned off, but no longer a scene of emergency. Birds nested near the upper rails, and rust gleamed where metal had been scrubbed clean by rain. Chief Calderon was there already, clipboard in hand. Her broad shoulders were wrapped in a navy parka, and she nodded as they approached. "We're doing structural checks today. Lucky you caught me." Ranger hesitated at the base of the tower, then looked to Emily. The girl nodded once. He stepped forward. Charles Monroe. Emily's grandfather arrived moments later with a thermos in hand and a folded blanket under one arm. He'd returned home the night before, but worry had kept him restless. He wore his old mail cap and a wool coat several sizes too big. His steps were slower than usual, and he watched Emily the way someone watches a spark in dry grass. "Afternoon," he said. "Someone want to tell me why we're back at the scene of the crime?" Emily led them to the service gate. Marissa Green, the young firefighter who had helped retrieve Ranger, was unlocking it. Her short hair was tucked under a knit beanie, and her gloved hands moved with quiet precision. "I asked her to open the access tunnel," Emily explained. "Ranger remembers something inside." Sarah gave a short laugh. "What is this ghost hunting for dogs?" "No," Emily said simply. "More like memory rescue." Inside, the lower corridors of the tower smelled of dust and oil. Pipes hummed with latent electricity. Ranger walked slowly, nose down, tail low, but not tucked. He stopped in front of a rusted locker near the base of the interior stairwell. It had been long abandoned, its hinges corroded shut. "He remembers this," Emily whispered. Charles stepped forward. "Want me to try it?" With a crowbar from Marissa's kit, he pried the door open. A clatter echoed as old equipment tumbled out. Coil rope gloves, a faded photo in a cracked frame. It showed Leonard Brooks, younger and clean-shaven, holding a puppy that was unmistakably Ranger. Sarah picked up the photo and gasped. This must have been where they kept supplies and memories. Emily gently touched the edge of the frame. He left it here when he came to look for Leonard. That's what was missing. Ranger nosed the photo gently, then settled beside it, resting his chin on the metal floor. His whole body relaxed. Outside, the wind picked up, sending a hollow whistle through the framework of the tower. Charles placed the photo in a dry evidence bag and handed it to Emily. "Keep it safe." That night they invited Leonard to the apartment. He arrived slowly, leaning on his cane, his movements more deliberate than before. When he saw the photo, his breath hitched. "I remember this," he said, tears forming. "It was right before I had my first real episode. I kept the photo here because I didn't want to lose it at home." He knelt slowly beside Ranger. "You found it. You brought her." Emily placed the photo in his hands. Leonard smiled. "I forgot so much, but I never forgot how he looked at me, like I was still whole." Chapter 4. The Unlikely Hero. The following Saturday brought with it a bright, wind-swept afternoon. The air had a crispness that signaled spring's final stand before summer crept in. In the center of Pine Brook's modest town square, a community gathering was underway. Tables laden with homemade pies and lemonade framed a small stage decorated with bunting and sunflowers. The townsfolk of Pine Brook, most of them still buzzing from the story of the tower rescue, had come together to honor the girl and the dog that reminded them what courage looked like. Emily Monroe stood behind the stage curtain, fiddling with the hem of her pale yellow dress. She wasn't used to attention. The spotlight, the clapping, the whispers, none of that suited her. She had always preferred quiet places. Books under stairwells, corners of school hallways, the stillness between people. Her mother, Sarah, stood beside her, crouched to fix a loose button. Sarah, tall and slim, in a green blouse and jeans, looked as if she hadn't slept well. Yet her eyes had softened since the rescue. The lines of exhaustion had become lines of reflection. She still didn't fully understand her daughter's connection with Ranger, but the fear had been replaced first by confusion, then by awe, and now something gentler. Trust, maybe. "I don't want to go up there," Emily whispered. Sarah smoothed the back of her hair. "You don't have to say anything. Just smile. Maybe wave. It'll be over before you know it." On the other side of the square, Leonard Brooks walked slowly between picnic tables, leaning heavily on his cane. He wore a crisp button-up shirt tucked into old slacks, and Ranger walked beside him, head held high. The dog's coat had already begun to regain its sheen thanks to daily meals rest, and Emily's quiet company. Leonard had changed, too. He stood taller, less afraid of the blank spaces in his memory. Every morning he sat with Ranger on the porch of his small home reading aloud from old journals, even if sometimes he had to stop and reread the same page twice. It didn't matter. Ranger listened anyway. As Leonard reached the front row, he gave a nod to Dr. Lillian Hawk, who sat off to the side beneath a wide-brimmed straw hat. She had brought Ranger into the shelter 2 years ago after Leonard's daughter, who had been helping care for him, moved out of state. No one expected the dog to live long without his person, but he had waited, quietly, unmoving, until Emily. Mayor Thomas Bradley took the stage. He was a large, round man in his 60s with silver hair and the kind of mustache that hadn't gone out of style only because he insisted it hadn't. In a beige suit that strained slightly at the buttons, he cleared his throat into the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, neighbors, friends, it's not every day a town like ours finds itself in the headlines. But what happened on that tower wasn't just a rescue. It was a miracle. A girl who heard what others couldn't. A dog who waited when others would have given up. And a community that remembered what it means to look out for one another." The crowd applauded. Emily shifted uncomfortably. And now the mayor continued. "Please welcome our very own Emily Monroe." The applause swelled as Emily stepped forward, Ranger at her side. But halfway up the steps, a loud gasp rose from the audience. A small boy, no more than 4, had broken away from his mother and run toward the front, directly in Ranger's path. A paper plate clutched in his hands caught the breeze, and in the confusion he stumbled, falling hard. Ranger, startled by the sudden movement, barked sharply. The crowd fell silent. The boy began to cry. His mother rushed forward, but before she could reach him, Emily was already on her knees. She whispered something to Ranger, not in words, but in the silent, strange way only she seemed to manage. Ranger stepped forward slowly and pressed his nose against the boy's arm, giving a soft, reassuring whine. The boy's crying ceased almost instantly, replaced with curiosity. A few more seconds passed, before laughter rippled through the audience. The moment had broken whatever formal tension had existed. Sarah exhaled deeply behind the curtain. Leonard chuckled. Mayor Bradley cleared his throat again. Well, I guess we know who the real star is. That night, after the celebration had ended and the tables were cleared, Leonard sat with Sarah on the steps of the Monroe apartment. Emily and Ranger lay on the rug inside, playing a quiet game with a knotted rope. "I've been thinking," Leonard said, brushing a hand over his cap, "about what happens next." Sarah tilted her head. "You mean with Ranger?" He nodded. "He still chooses her. I've seen dogs loyal before, but this is something else. He calms when she's around. He remembers things. And if I'm honest, I think she needs him more than I do." Sarah blinked. "You'd give him up?" Leonard smiled sadly. "No, I'd be giving him back." They sat in silence, watching through the open door as Emily wrapped her arms around Ranger's neck, whispering something into his ear. Chapter 5. The Connected Souls. It was a quiet Sunday morning in Pine Brook, the kind that smelled of pancakes and damp grass. The town had begun to settle back into its rhythms. Gardens needed tending, laundry flapped on clotheslines, and the tower, once the site of chaos, stood silent and still against a pale blue sky. But inside, apartment 3B, something had changed. Emily Monroe sat cross-legged on the living room rug, her hair still tousled from sleep. Ranger rested beside her, his head nestled in her lap, eyes closed in perfect contentment. The rope toy lay forgotten between them. What passed between them wasn't play, it was presence, wordless, undemanding, sacred. Sarah Monroe, tall and lean, with a look of someone always, one cup of coffee short of peace, stood in the kitchen doorway watching the two. Her green eyes, once worn thin with fear and fatigue, now softened with something she hadn't allowed herself in years believe. Her own childhood had been filled with things no one believed: an alcoholic father who claimed to see ghosts, a mother who vanished into cultish spirituality. Sarah had chosen science structure medicine. But her daughter somehow was neither fantasy nor delusion. Emily just was. Charles Monroe, the retired mail carrier and doting grandfather, shuffled into the kitchen holding a clipboard and a small cup of birdseed. He had become the unofficial caretaker of a family of wrens that nested just outside the fire escape. Ever since Emily had convinced one to perch on his shoulder last week, he had taken the role very seriously. "She's doing it again," he said casually, nodding toward Emily. Sarah raised a brow. "Doing what?" "Listening. That deep kind of listening, like she's tuning into something none of us can hear." Before Sarah could respond, there was a knock at the door. Emily didn't flinch, but Ranger lifted his head. At the door stood a girl, perhaps 8 years old, with dark brown skin and tightly braided hair, wearing a bright red jacket 2 sizes too big. She held a folded flyer in one hand. Behind her stood a thin woman in her late 20s, tired eyes framed by librarian glasses, a brown corduroy coat clinging to her narrow frame. "Hi," the girl said. "Are you Emily?" Emily nodded. "My name's Lacey," the girl continued. "I think I need your help." Sarah moved protectively beside her daughter. "What kind of help, sweetheart?" Lacey looked up. "My cat's missing. His name is Oatmeal. He's deaf. He ran out the night of the storm and nobody's been able to find him." The woman behind her stepped forward. I'm Valerie. Lacey's my niece. She's been staying with me since the accident, since her parents passed. Her voice cracked slightly and Sarah's gaze softened. Valerie was pale, clearly worn from grief and sudden responsibility. She looked like someone trying to hold together a fragile boat in a storm with bare hands. Emily stood up, smoothing her dress. I can try. They left not long after Emily, Ranger, Lacey, and Sarah. Valerie stayed behind with Charles, grateful for a moment of adult company and warm coffee. Pinebrook was small, but the neighborhood near the railway tracks was older, with cracked sidewalks and rusted fences. Oatmeal, according to Lacey, was a cream-colored tabby with one green eye and one blue. He had been her parents' cat since she was a baby. They searched for hours. Emily paused at trees, listened near fences, even closed her eyes in alleyways. Ranger would sniff, then look to Emily as if waiting for a sign. Sarah, ever the practical one, kept glancing at her watch but didn't say a word. Finally, in the alley behind an old laundromat, Emily stopped. He's here, she said. Lacey looked around. I don't see him. Emily knelt and pressed her palm to the concrete. He's underground. They followed a narrow path that led to a storm drain barely wide enough for a child. Sarah hesitated. We can't just send her in there. I'm not, Emily said. Ranger is. The German shepherd approached the grate, sniffed once, then barked softly. From deep below, barely audible, came a faint answering meow. Ranger, slim but strong, crawled into the drain's open mouth without hesitation. Minutes passed. Then, slowly, Ranger backed out, careful and precise, carrying in his jaws a soggy, but very much alive, oatmeal, his eyes wide and blinking. Lacey burst into tears. Sarah crouched beside her daughter and placed a hand on her back. How did you know Emily didn't answer right away? She looked at Lacey, now cradling her cat. Because sometimes when something's lost, it doesn't want to be found by just anyone. It needs someone who's been lost too. That night, after the storm drain had been cleaned, after Valerie hugged Sarah with tears in her eyes and thanked her for giving her niece hope. Again, Emily lay in bed with Ranger curled beside her. The moonlight spilled across the floor in long ribbons. Sarah came in and sat on the edge of the bed. I wanted to tell you something, she said, about your gift. I don't understand it. I don't know how it works. But I know it's real. And I know you don't have to hide it anymore. Emily rolled to face her eyes, half-lidded with sleep. Are you scared of it? She asked. Sarah smiled faintly. I was. But not anymore. Outside, a wren sang once from the fire escape, even though it was far past sundown. And inside, a girl and a dog, two old souls wrapped in new skin, breathed in rhythm, held by something deeper than understanding. In a world that often moves too fast to notice the quiet ones, a little girl with wild curls and a silent heart reminded a town, and maybe even the rest of us, that some connections run deeper than logic, and some rescues happen in more than just the physical sense. Ranger was never just a dog. Emily was never just a child. Together, they were a bridge between what is seen and what is felt. They didn't just save each other. They saved a memory. They saved a family. They gave a grieving veteran his peace, a lonely child her cat, and a mother, a reason to believe in something bigger than fear. And maybe that's the truth we forget in our busy lives, that healing doesn't always roar in like thunder. Sometimes it comes in soft footsteps, in gentle eyes, in whispers only the heart can hear. We don't need to understand everything to be kind, to be patient, to be open. Sometimes believing is enough. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who may need a little reminder that love still shows up in unexpected ways. Leave a comment below with the word Amen if you believe that every soul, human or animal, deserves to be seen, to be loved, and to be found. May God bless you and your loved ones with the quiet courage to listen, the strength to love, and the faith to never give up. Subscribe to the channel for more real and inspired stories of hope, healing, and second chances. Every share brings this message a little closer to someone who may be waiting in silence, just like Ranger once was. With love. Together Wild.